My name is Lindsay Smith, and I'd like to welcome all of you all to a new lunchtime series we're having at the School for the Future of Innovation and Society called Borderland Technologies, Data Practices and Stories. This is brought to you by the STS Borderlands Research Group here, which is a collection of students and faculty and postdocs interested broadly in science and technology and what we understand as the Mexican borderlands. So we have our inaugural lecture today, and Bill Budington from the Electronic Frontier Foundation is joining us. We're really lucky to have him. He is a longtime activist and senior technologist with the EFF, and they are a group of activists and interveners who try to understand, really intervene in surveillance and technology practices. I really would highlight their Atlas of Surveillance. If you guys haven't seen it before, you can Google it and check it out. It's a really wonderful resource and project, but one of many. So Bill is going to talk to us today about crossing the border and what you can do to protect your data. So I'm going to turn it over to Bill. Thanks.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to my talk, Crossing the Border with Your Electronic Devices. In the first of this Borderlands Technologies lecture series, my name is Bill Budington, and I am a senior staff technologist at the Electronic Frontier Foundation, a nonprofit based in the San Francisco Bay Area. I just wanted to add a quick caveat that although the first half of this talk provides a lot of legal information, I myself am not a lawyer, and thus it does not provide legal advice to you nor anyone you know. So jumping right into it, why is security and privacy important for our digital devices? Well, for first, it is really a window into your soul. Our devices contain all these different minute pieces of information about us, our communications, private family photos, possibly medical documents, even encrypted digital wallets, banking information, the websites that we visit, the search terms that we search. All these things are contained on our devices. And this provides an unprecedented level of information about us. It is a kind of window into one's soul when looking at what information is available on these devices. In a case, Riley versus California, which was ruled in the Supreme Court in 2014, ruled that the privacies of American life are contained on modern cell phones. So it's not the equivalent of, say, anything else that you might carry across the border. And our digital lives and digital privilege information can be held in these devices. Most democratic societies have exempted certain types of information from being searched and being accessed by law enforcement, including things like attorney-client privilege, communications with your lawyer, private medical information that is contained in a doctor-patient relationship, and often, in some aspects, reporters have privileges that are afforded to them. In some countries, religious exceptions may apply as well. So protecting your privacy and privileges are vital in the border context. What is a border? When I talk about a border, what does that mean? Well, it's not just a physical entry into the land or a physical border, not necessarily literal place where the nation ends. International, for the purposes of customs, international airports are borders, and searches are subject to international airports. Countries often will assert their powers that inside a region, the U.S. 100 miles inside a region is kind of considered a border region where, for instance, for the purposes of immigrations and custom enforcement, ICE officers are allowed to do, board buses, for instance, within that 100-mile border radius. And there could be things like a customs union. For instance, in the European Union, there is the Schengen zone, which encompasses many European Union countries where there's actually a physical border between the countries, but if you're traveling between Schengen countries and you're an EU citizen, then you might have an exception to the regular border and customs controls that if you were, as opposed to if you were entering from outside the European Union. And just a kind of law and policy overview here is that governments will tend to assert more power and authority at the border than they will within the borders of a country. But border does not mean that law enforcement is above the law. In the U.S. context, this kind of typically comes up the protections that you are afforded at the border. Typically comes up in the U.S. Constitution, the Fourth Amendment, which applies not just to citizens but anyone at the border. The right of people, not to be against unreasonable search and seizure. Not only that, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and international law enshrines that people may not be subject to arbitrary interference with their privacy, family, home, or correspondence. So these are kind of some precedences that are in effect for at the border. In the United States, nonetheless, a border and customs agent may ask for you to unlock your device. And they may ask you to provide your device password. You might be asked to disclose social media handles. If you refuse, there are a few different consequences based on your level of citizenship and residency. If you're a U.S. citizen, you cannot be denied entry into the country just based on refusing. They might take away your device, but you can't actually be denied entry into the country because you are a U.S. citizen. If you are a permanent resident in a country, well, refusing any of these might raise some questions about your immigration status. You may have a harder trip to citizenship if you seek to apply that down the line. So that can come up later. And anyone else that attempts to enter the country but refuses a search may be denied entry completely and just turned back at the border itself. So these are some of the consequences based on your level of citizenship. And border searches are on the rise year after year. Of course, in 2020, with the COVID epidemic, we had less border crossings, but there are a fair amount, an increasing amount of border searches that take place, advanced border searches, year after year. You can see, fiscal year 2012 through 2019, a dramatic increase. So, just some of the kind of bureaucracy at the border is that Customs and Border Patrol are able to conduct primary inspections of all travelers. This just means, any, crossing that you have taken internationally. That's typically a primary search, just looking through a traveler's documents, deciding whether to admit them to and then, or whether to subject that person to a secondary inspection. So if you get selected for a secondary inspection, this may involve an electronic device search. And what electronic device search means, well, there's two levels. It can be a manual or advanced search. The manual search is basically taking that device and tapping through it, mousing through it, looking through it. Basically, a customs agent physically having the device and and manually searching through it, basically. And an advanced or forensic search is using software to image that device, even able to get deleted files or photos from that device as well. And so these are the two levels of secondary search. And with that secondary search comes an electronic media report. which shows the device details, the type of search that the officer conducted, and any of the remarks that that officer might have on that search. In addition, there's the automated targeting system, which the traveler is subject to with secondary searches, a decision support tool that basically creates a risk assessment of that traveler and may determine whether they get into the country or not. With advanced searches, that involves taking a copy of the device, image and results of a search onto a thumb drive, and that is, then uploaded to the automated targeting system for kind of further analysis. And the government may not provide any notice about this happening, but the Department of Homeland Security says it's okay because they have it in Section 2.3 of their privacy policy. So of course you've read it. And your prize for all of this is you get this, you might get this piece of paper, which is a 2-pager about the search, suitable for framing in your home or office. Ordinarily, that they will keep that device for less than 5 days if they conduct some kind of advanced search, but there's no real time limit, and they can also share that data with other agencies. According to the Office of Inspector General report, which they're a agency which makes sure that the rules are being followed for government agencies, they found that in the electronic media reports, 194 of them that they reviewed, they identified problems in 67% of those. Mostly it was keeping those devices connected to the network when they were supposed to be removed completely from the network and put on airplane mode or disconnected from any internet connection. And OIG officers found that they did not consistently do this. Not only that, but in 3 out of every 5 ports of entry that the OIG tested, they found that thumb drives contained information of past searches, past advanced searches. So really the Customs and Border Patrol or Customs agents are not following their own policies consistently. In addition, over the past 4 years, the Trump administration had introduced this thing called extreme vetting, which is where the Department of Homeland Security will collect social media handles, aliases, and search results, blogs, what your browsing history has been, and they may subject you to additional questions about any of the contents that they find on your device. This scope of this program expanded throughout 2017, 2018, and 2020 in 3 separate executive orders by the Trump administration. But there was an election, and in 2021, on his first day in office, President Biden rescinded and basically nixed all of Trump's previous executive orders about extreme vetting, and the extreme vetting program was officially ended at that point. So extreme vetting no longer a thing, but the border search exception is still a thing. Basically, a border search exception means that there will be additional search capacities by law enforcement at the border. Constitutional protections still apply, but with routine searches, for instance, just searching through someone's bag, that does not require a warrant or any individualized suspicion. Any search, however, that is non-routine needs individualized suspicion. Something that's highly intrusive or impacts a person's dignity, privacy interests. This often comes up, in the first instance when this was introduced, with border cavity searches and looking for drugs. So these are kind of examples of highly intrusive searches. And I would submit that your mobile device, which contains so much about your life, is also a highly intrusive, particularly offensive kind of search. Well, within the borders of the US, not crossing the border, but within the borders, Supreme Court has had set some precedents In the case of Riley versus California, a warrant is required to search a mobile phone. In 2018, Carpenter versus the US reinforced the Riley decision, also kind of expanded it to mobile device search location searches. In addition, declined to extend this idea of the third-party doctrine. Third-party doctrine is basically something that says that if you've given your location over to a third party, then you're giving up your privacy rights with regard to that information. So Carpenter refused to really extend that to location data. So that's a good thing. But when crossing the border, well, the US law is kind of still in flux here. Two different courts of appeals have found that forensic searches are, require a reasonable suspicion of contraband being on the phone. And, what in this case most likely is contraband on a phone is, physically, on a phone is, child pornography or child explicit sexual material. These are examples of contraband being on the phone. And so, there has to be kind of a reasonable suspicion for contraband to be on a phone for, a manual search for a forensic search to occur. But a manual search does not require that suspicion. And that's been found in the Fourth Circuit and Ninth Circuit courts of appeals. The appeals courts on the federal level, you can kind of see where this law applies based on the map on the right here. The 11th and First Circuit Court of Appeals upheld a much looser standard, saying that basically forensic search is cool by them without any suspicion of wrongdoing whatsoever. And with a 5th, 7th, and 10th Circuit Court of Appeals, they dodged the question. So that is still in flux here. And with regards to cloud information, in the decision in Riley in 2014, it said that finding access to cloud credentials on someone's phone and then looking through someone's cloud-based, say, photos would be like finding a key in someone's wallet and then saying that it's okay to simply go into their house and look, everything is, shelved around and look at their personal belongings. And so that was not sufficient. And officially the Customs and Border Patrol policy is to disconnect a phone from a network. But again, that we've seen that doesn't necessarily always happen. And this limitation doesn't apply to immigrations and customs enforcement. In general, now, if you're protecting your phone with a passphrase or password, then that provides a greater level of legal protection than a fingerprint. Case law will distinguish between passwords and fingerprints because passwords, if you are forced to divulge it, it's like incriminating yourself. So that's kind of a Fifth Amendment protection that applies there. And for fingerprints, this is that kind of logic doesn't apply. So border agents can simply force your finger onto the phone to unlock that device. So recommendations when crossing the border is to really to use passwords instead of face ID or fingerprint ID. And governments may have a record of your fingerprint somewhere. They can simply pick it up from another place and reconstruct your fingerprint, which has been done before, to unlock devices. So kind of some considerations when crossing the border about things about what your citizenship is, your residency status, your immigration status, your travel history, whether you've been arrested before, if you have a criminal record, and also your simply willingness to put up with delays and hassles at the border. These are some of the considerations that you might want to take into effect when, say, refusing to give a law enforcement or customs enforcement agent access to your device. You might want to, on the other hand, make a statement and, actually say, no, this is something that I don't want. This is, on a principle grounds. And that's, something that you might want to take into effect. And In addition, your data and the data that you have on that device, whether it be a laptop or mobile device, the sensitivity of that data, what would happen if you don't have access to that information? Say you have a work project that's due or something like that. Well, these are all considerations to take into effect when deciding whether you're going to, refuse a search or just let them in. In addition, we have some tips before you arrive at the border to protect your information. Talk to your employers about any work devices that you may have with you. They might have a policy in play, with regards to those, especially if you work at a workplace that handles privileged information, like the types that I set forth earlier in this presentation, doctors, attorney-client privilege, that kind of thing. When you carry, you can minimize the amount of data that you carry with you, make backups, encrypt that data, use strong passphrases with that data. You might want to log out of any social media accounts, remove credentials that are on that phone so that someone at the border can't simply just look at your tweets or look at your Facebook posts, for instance. Or if any sensitive data that you want to look up, medical conditions, the like, you don't want a customs agent getting at that, then you can look up that data on private browsing mode in any browser that you have on your device. But most importantly, the easiest thing to do and the safest thing to do is simply not bringing your device with you. You can leave your device at home or at work. Obviously this presents some inconvenience, but it might be worth it. Or use a temporary device. There's a kind of new market for burner phones, mostly from the convenience factor of not being contacted by your employer. But there are new kind of low cost phones out there that you can bring with you. You can delete data on any mobile device that you have so that you don't have to fear it being accessed by law enforcement or customs enforcement. If you need the data and you need access to the data, then just simply move it to the cloud and it won't be on your device physically. Remove those credentials to the cloud. But after you cross the border, then you can re-log into your Dropbox account and re-download that information. At the border, when you're there, plan ahead, be polite to any customs enforcement agent. There's not going to do you any favors by being rude. Don't lie to border agents. That'll often lead you down a path of more trouble than any data that they might get from the phone itself. Don't physically interfere with a border agent. Don't try to, hold your phone away or remove their hand from the phone or anything like that, because that'll definitely get you more trouble than it's worth. Assert any privileges that you might have, attorney-client privilege, etc., like I mentioned, or anything that you can document about a customs or advanced search or whatever you're subject to. For instance, names of any enforcement agents, badge numbers, agencies, any seized property. That's something that you want to record for later. And in these situations, you might be, intimidated. You might be, in a darkly lit room, and a customs agent might say, "Hey, can I, open this up or look through this phone?" Well, it's okay to basically ask them if that is an order or a request. So if it's an order, if it's a request, that you could just, deny that. And then if it's an order, then you kind of have to choose your own adventure. You can comply with that order and, make things easier in terms of crossing the border for your convenience. Or if you refuse to comply, that might, is an escalation tactic and might present troubles to you, but it might be worth it depending on your threat level. And after the border, make sure that you have documented anything that you've documented. Then you can, later file a Freedom of Information Act request or a Public Records Act request for information on that encounter, or policies that are related to how that search was conducted. You can change any passwords that you've given to a border agent or have typed in under the camera. You might want to, you definitely want to change those passwords because they're going to be recording those passwords and possibly putting them into a federal database. And any devices that have been accessed, especially by forensic analysis tools, and taken away from you for some period of time, you'll probably want to wipe and restore those devices. So transitioning from kind of the legal protections to technological measures you might have, as I mentioned, the best protection, of course, is not bringing your device with you. If you don't have it with you, then they have nothing to access. Temporary devices, as I mentioned, might be useful, but you can take proper technological measures to protect devices from prying eyes, and these technological measures, if done right, will protect your data the best that you can. At this point, I want to kind of give a shout out to Upturn, which is a nonprofit which produced this report detailing how widespread and how intrusive the powers of U.S. law enforcement are to search phones. And this is mostly within the borders of the U.S. They're documenting, not necessarily across the border, crossing the border, but they found that in 110 different public records requests that they filed, it was returned that 2,000 agencies were using advanced forensic tools in all 50 states in the District of Columbia. And these searches that were being done on mobile phones were the result of not, a murder case or assault, but there were all sorts of arrests. Cases involving major harm, but also for graffiti, shoplifting, marijuana possession, prostitution, vandalism, all sorts of different crimes, even public intoxication or petty drug offenses, subjected those arrestees to advanced forensic searches using tools at law enforcement's disposal. And some of the tools that I want to kind of highlight some of the companies that are players in the forensic imaging sphere. One of which is Cellebrite, and Cellebrite is a longtime player in forensic imaging. They have deployed, as it says, more than 60,000 universal forensic extraction devices to law enforcement throughout 150 different countries, making Cellebrite a major player here. And often they will partner with countries such as China, which have records of human rights abuses. They actually had their own division marketing specifically to the Chinese state. But after a campaign of pressure, specifically by newspaper Haaretz in Israel, Cellebrite is an Israeli company. The company was pressured to basically withdraw their products from China, but they were still available on the secondary market by resellers. So Chinese police were still able to get to them to get those devices. Well, what are the capabilities of Cellebrite and imaging phones? Well, they say that they, in 2019, they said that they can have, basically image and get access to the data and bypass screen locks on any iOS device. While that might have been true then, in a brochure that was published on their website in November 2020, it says that they have access to most Android and iOS devices out there, but you may run into devices with no known solution for access to their terminology. Well, so that probably indicates that the latest iOS and Android devices, they don't necessarily have access to. Another player in this field is a manufacturer of a device called a Gray Key, and Gray Keys are produced by a company called Grayshift, which is Atlanta-based forensic analysis that mostly images iOS devices. They provided their product in two different levels, a $15,000 level and a $30,000 level. And $15,000 level gets you access to image, a certain number of devices, and then the $30 level, many more devices. So Grayshift sells access to these different types of devices. There, in this report in January, it was kind of pointing to the fact that the FBI was able to unlock an iPhone 11 Pro Max with a Gray key product, but they were still asking Apple to unlock an older iPhone with less protections. So what gives? The implication there is that the FBI is really kind of trying to set a legal precedent so that they will in the future be allowed to force Apple to comply with demands to unlock phones, regardless of whether they are able to crack them or not. Some ideas about Grayshift's revenue stream over the past years. They have gotten money from contracts with a whole slew of different law enforcement agents, both federal and local. U.S. Coast Guard, a secretive unit called Domex in the $30,000 level. U.S. State Department, $15,000. ICE, $1.2 million contract in 2019. In that upturn report that I showed earlier, a widespread deployment in local and federal law enforcement was revealed through those public records requests. And that was a report published in October 2020. And on October 26th, 2020, it was revealed that Peak Equity Partners, which is a investment firm, had given Grayshift $47 million to finance their operations. So they got a big boost in revenue last year, doubling their, according to their claims by their CEO, doubling their employment and revenue in that 1 year alone. In terms of Grayshift's expansion, they've gotten a bigger office in Atlanta where they're based, and they opened new offices in London and in Japan. So they're really a global iPhone cracking and actually also Android cracking enterprise. So in the last 6 or 7 months, they rapidly expanded to 20 different models of Android phones as well. So they're really kind of growing bigger as time goes on and providing law enforcement across the globe more and more access to the private data of their citizens and those that are traveling across their borders. Apple's response to some of the developments in iPhone cracking has been to enable something called, or introduce something called USB restricted mode, which turns off the Thunderbolt port, which is, show you the image again, this connector for modern iPhones. That's a Thunderbolt port, and that ordinarily allows data and power to traverse the wire. But when they introduce USB restricted mode, after 1 hour of not unlocking your phone, then that port can still charge your phone, but it will not allow any data to flow over it, and thus stymieing any attempts to extract information from that phone. In a later version of USB restricted mode, on iOS 13.1, introduced USB accessory pairing, which allowed users to set up a list of devices that are allowed to transfer data and not allow others. So that would kind of also stymie any attempt to image a phone. And there's been speculations of getting around those protections, but those I'll get into that in a minute. The biggest suggestion, recommendation that we have here is to enable full disk encryption. It's a powerful mechanism for protecting your data. It protects all the data that's sitting on a device. It doesn't protect any of the data necessarily that's going over the network at all, but it will protect the data at rest, sitting on your device. In most cases, it is a separate passphrase that you have when you are unlocking your screen from when you are unlocking your device. Often you'll have, for instance, on your iPhone, Face ID or Touch ID, and that is separate from your full disk encryption passphrase. So when you boot up the device, you'll be presented with the alphanumeric or digits that you need to enter to unlock your disk. And then that's going to be separate from, obviously your fingerprint or face to unlock via Touch ID or Face ID. So keep that in mind. In device encryption, for iOS, uses this thing called the Secure Enclave processor, and it actually runs its own operating system called SEPOS, which allows iPhones to attempt to throttle the passphrase failure attempts. So, if you're entering a passphrase and it's not correct, then, after the first attempt, it'll, present some delay, and after subsequent attempts, it'll present a longer delay before you're allowed into the device. And after something like 10 attempts, it'll lock that phone down so that no one can get into it. This is all provided by the Secure Enclave processor. And it uses this, kind of complex process of entanglement between your PIN and passphrase and some key material that's baked into the device at manufacture time, as well as something that is generated on the phone itself. So what we've kind of seen in the past year is that there have been revealed some bypasses to the Secure Enclave processor, specifically for devices with the A11 processor or below, which is iPhone 10 or older devices, may be able to completely bypass the Secure Enclave. And this is a kind of a news story that was that revealed this hack. So, that's something to keep in mind. You have a newer device than an iPhone 10, most likely this Secure Enclave processor hack will not affect you. So presuming that it does affect you, what is the protection that you have? Cryptographer Matthew Green here kind of estimates these different levels or different time required to crack unlock passphrase with 4 digits, 6 digits, 8 digits, 10 digits. As you can see, an 8-digit numeric password is much better than a 4-digit numeric password, and 10 digits even better than that. But our current recommendation is to choose a password that's strong, and because that's really critical for encryption. Modern password crackers can try trillions of guesses from huge word lists using complex combinatorics. But really, one of the main recommendations we have when choosing a master passphrase for your device is to choose 5 or 6 random words that can be resistant against those password crackers. This kind of is able to jog our memory because we're able to form a story about those different words in a way that our brains are very uniquely capable of forming a story about seemingly random words. It kind of uses an advantage that we have as humans when choosing a passphrase. So using this methodology of 4 or 5, 6 random words can be very powerful against password crackers. And one of the ways you could choose a passphrase like that is to go to EFF.org/dice and just kind of see use dice to choose random passphrases and investigate the methodology that we present there. So with device encryption, Android has had it for a long time, since 2013. Android 4.4 has had partial support for device encryption. Full support for device encryption on Android was introduced in Android 6.0 with any operating system that had Google Apps included by default. So if you had Gmail, on your device when you bought it, and it's Android 6 or above, then you have full disk encryption enabled. You can check your settings as well to see what level of encryption that you have on your device. iOS devices have also had full disk encryption for a long, long time. All iPads, iPhone 3GS and later, for ages and ages, iOS has had full disk encryption available. In Windows, on the desktop devices, Windows has a thing called BitLocker, which is makes device encryption available and has had it since Windows 8.1. Notably, there was an exploit that was found when BitLocker was using hardware encryption. If there was a way for a disk to assure the operating system that it was encrypting itself, rather than using software encryption, then BitLocker would use that instead. But unfortunately, when studied, a lot of hardware encryption is simply snake oil. It depends heavily on the manufacturer. So you really want to be using strong software-based encryption and not just trusting the disk to say, yes, I've encrypted myself. The way that you can check is to run this command, manage bde.exe. And there's also Veracrypt, which is a separate way to encrypt your disk on Windows. So you can use Veracrypt, and that's been available since 2013. macOS has a program called File Vault 2, and it's been available for a decade. Linux has also had full disk encryption available for a long, long time. Some tips. Well, do not forget your passphrase ever, because you'll be locked out unless you're a tool like BitLocker that lets you back up your passphrase. But in that case, someone else, say Windows, knows your full encryption passphrase and maybe forced to disclose it with the power of subpoena. So if you're comfortable with that, then you might want to back up that passphrase. Otherwise, if it's only you that knows it, make sure that you remember it. One trick I use is if it's a passphrase that I don't often type, is to set myself a weekly Google Calendar reminder to actually look up or refresh my memory of what passphrases I don't often type and basically make sure that I still know them. When you're crossing the border, turn off fingerprint and face unlock. That's going to be something that a border agent can easily force you to unlock your device with. One easy way that enforces that you are going to type your disk unlock passphrase before anyone gets access to your data is to turn your device off. If it's off, you bring it up again, then you're presented with that disk encryption prompt. Next, secure deletion is a powerful way to delete files that you don't use or need anymore. Simple deletion does not remove data from a disk. It only removes the demarcation of something as a file. And all the bits are still there. It just erases the line around them that says that that is a file. So simple deletion does not actually remove data. You want to really be using a secure deletion that overwrites the bits that a file was allocated to, because a border agent can easily get deleted files. Even someone who has simple tools at home can undelete files. So secure deletion is a powerful mechanism, but you want to make sure that you're doing it correctly. You want to with USB flash drives, SSDs, memory cards, there may or may not be a way that you can really securely delete files reliably. There are some SSD drive options, capabilities that come close, which is trim, and DZAT, which is deterministic zero at trim. These are features of SSDs that claim to do very secure deletion. And you can check if your SSD has this capability by this command here, hdparm-i. Formatting, quick format or high-level format does not actually delete data from a device. Again, it just designates that device as formatted and not usable, but actually doesn't delete any data from it. You want to use low-level formatting or secure formatting. With overriding. These terms are indicating that you're going to delete that data. Overwrite that with zeros or some other data. Some tools that are available for secure deletion. You can use on Linux or Windows BleachBit, which allows deletion not only of files, but of web browser history, thumbnails, etc. On Mac OS, you can use a command like rm-p, capital P. Other tools like SRM have been removed in recent versions. Secure deletion is available when you actually just use disk encryption. If you are using disk encryption, then you only need to delete the encryption key reliably, and then everything that was encrypted with that encryption key is no longer available. This functionality is built into a thing called factory reset on iOS, but also power wash on Chromebook. That is a kind of code word in those operating systems for simply wiping that encryption key and no longer having that data available. In Linux, this is achievable through removing the LUK slot that you have for your passphrase, or reinstalling the operating system, overriding the original. So trusted boot. Trusted boot is a way that you can make sure that the operating system that you're loading hasn't been tampered with at boot time. This requires something called a trusted platform module or equivalent. And notably, this does not protect data after it is on the operating system, but it makes sure that any piece of malware that might have been installed on the machine is not able to really deeply entrench itself onto that machine. This is achieved by verifying the boot sequence at every step of the way, and there are a number of kind of neat ways that this is achieved. One is through simply using your Google Authenticator and checking whether the boot sequence matches the passphrase that's presented to you on your Google Authenticator account. This is something called TPM-TOTP. I thought that was a kind of clever use of one-time passwords in order to verify the boot sequence on a machine. These are different levels of trusted boot that are available in different operating systems. On iOS, the architecture looks like a low-level bootloader to iBoot, so it's available on iOS. Android 4.4 and later offers this thing called verified boot. Android 8 has this thing called Android verified boot, which protects against rollback protection. It basically doesn't allow the operating system to roll back to a previous version. And ensures that, say a version that's older and has a vulnerability in it, as of Android 8, any operating system that you have installed on your Android phone will be the latest that it has ever run. And in custom mods, you need to be very wary of, using a custom Android. For instance, Lineage OS, which is the biggest custom mod for Android, does not have boot protection built in. There are desktop support for trusted boot in Chrome OS, Mac OS, and Windows. Moving on to cloud storage, I see we're kind of running out of time, so I want to speed this up a bit. With cloud storage, legal protections can be less sometimes than than data stored on your device. Some border police will, basically gain access to your cloud through your device. But offloading content to a device from a device before you cross the border can offer powerful protections. But there's the caveat, of course, that there is no cloud, just other people's computers. So what the cloud constitutes is a server living somewhere, right? Well, that data can be accessed by governments with the power of subpoena. Hackers might be able to get at that data that are stored in the cloud. And most cloud services offer, encryption in transit through, something like HTTPS, but the most common ones don't offer any further protection. However, there is some cloud storage providers which provide something called zero knowledge, and this is encrypting the data on locally before you ever send it to the cloud. And then, once you download it from the cloud, you have to provide some decryption passphrase or something, that's stored locally that's already been entered on your computer, so that the cloud provider never gets access to that data. It can't get access because it's been encrypted before it was ever uploaded. So this provides good protection against government hackers, data breaches, etc. But again, you have to have a backup of your key material and remember a passphrase potentially in order to retrieve that stored data. Well, okay, the services that do offer and don't offer this kind of extra level of protection in cloud storage, this zero knowledge guarantee. Well, the ones that offer it are kind of lesser known services, Spider Oak, Keybase, File System, Treasurit, the like. Those that don't offer it are the most common ones like iCloud, Google Drive, Dropbox. So if you're wanting some level, some extra level of protection, your data doesn't, when it's uploaded to cloud, isn't able to have it accessed by hackers or the power of subpoena, then you want to use one of these services on the left. So the common takeaways, from this presentation is that the best defense is not to bring your device with you at all. But if you have to bring your device with you, use full disk encryption, use trusted boot. And if you combine this with removing data from your device before crossing the border, then this can offer some powerful protections. Thanks very much. And I think that this ends the presentation, and gonna move on to Q&A.
You're muted, Octavio.
Thank you very much, Bill. I think that was an amazing and very handy presentation. So if you have any questions, you can write them down in the Q&A option or in the chat. Yeah, but in the meantime, it is incredible how much of your personal identity can fit in just one piece of plastic and metal and other stuff. So my question was about precisely the operative systems like Linux. There are some Linux phones that are not so popular, but they do exist, and there might be more of them. So my question there is if you think that there is a higher level of security because it's a different operative system, maybe for Gray key. And my second question would be if governments request access to Google or Facebook or Apple, there is a legal process and maybe a central point for the government agencies to contact them to that task. But what about Linux, which is more decentralized, or any other open source software?
Yeah, so I think that the question of Linux phones really depends heavily on the phone and the software that's running, right? One good thing about Android phones is that Android operating system has the power of millions of dollars being invested into it in terms of security, in terms of having, protections against any range of possible, process forking or like a bunch of different types of exploits. And so the advantage there is that, well, Google has historically been very responsive to hardening their operating system, hardening Android, and making that something. And Android, of course, is also based on Linux, but there's also Android forks which give you I guess lower level access to the operating system. You might need to be careful there, though, because if you have lower level access, then it's possible that any malware that's installed on your phone might also have lower level access as well. So kind of some of the mods that I mentioned, Lineage OS, that's one that gives you root access, and there's numerous others that are capable of giving you kind of lower level access. I kind of touched on which ones offer trusted boot, and that Lineage OS does not offer that, but there's like Graphene OS and Calyx OS. Those are being developed that do. But I think it just depends on if it's a Linux phone that's not an Android based phone, then it'll depend heavily on just the architecture of how they constructed the operating system and how it boots. If they're using something like verify, like a TPM or something that ensures that the platform is secure from boot time up to the operating system, then that's a good protection. But there's in the other case, with Linux, is kind of constructed as a operating system which doesn't necessarily have the separation of processes that is typical now in mobile operating systems. So yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. So we have a couple of questions. So anonymous attendee asks, in terms of legal options available to someone who refuses to comply with an order at the border, are these options different for citizens and non-citizens? For example, do non-citizens have fewer rights than a citizen when they both refuse to comply with the Customs and Border Protection Agent order? Thank you.
Yeah. I said, like, the consequences may be different. Legal protections, will be different as well. I don't want to speak specifically to what legal protections are and aren't available, as I'm not a lawyer. But you can certainly email info@eff.org with those questions, and we'll be happy to get back to you on those.
Okay, thank you. So we have another question from Martin Perez Comiso. Can you elaborate more about how the notion of the devices as register of your soul and the implications of encryption? Why your own data must be encrypted to be safe? What other regulatory alternatives do you think might be helpful to approach our conceptions of personal data?
Sure. Just kind of the idea of our phones containing so much of our personal lives, and that if someone has access to that data, then they can, it's much more revealing than if you, in bygone times might carry a photo or two in your wallet. Because we have so much of our life carried with us, that's much more unprecedented access to, very personal information. And the second part of the question was again?
Yes.
What was the second part?
This question?
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's asking about other regulatory. Yeah. Maybe we can jump to the next question. So how do we make the tips in your presentation to protect our digital identities accessible to communities who cross the border routinely for work? The migrant workers in the US-Mexico border. Mm-hmm. Do you or your organization do some work around this?
Yeah, so we advise organizations that do that work, like Centro Legal de la Raza and other organizations. We work closely with those kind of organizations that work closely with communities that are crossing the border, either in work context or other contexts. So we are not necessarily frontline there in terms of getting that information out to those communities, but we do offer a lot of our resources. If you go to ssd.eff.org, which is surveillance self-defense, we offer those resources in dozens of languages, including English and Spanish. So we try to make that as accessible as possible.
Great, thank you. So we are on time. So Bill, thank you very much for this wonderful presentation. I think we learned a lot about how to protect ourselves and how to protect our personal identities on our devices. Before leaving, I just wanted to remind you about the next speaker in this speaker series that we are gonna hold every Thursday during the fall semester. So next week, we have Laura Aragon from Mukira, and she's gonna talk about how technology gave hope to feminicide cases in Juarez. So she's an advocate for women's rights with international experience in Latin America and the United States, as an expert conceptualizing, directing, and implementing innovative programs to advance women's rights and their access to justice and prevent gender-based violence. So yeah, so see you next time. I hope this was really helpful for all of you. And thank you very much for your attendance.